You know, there's a particular kind of story that forces you to stop whatever you're doing, sit down, and say out loud, maybe to an empty room, maybe to the dog, whatever, what in the actual hell is going on? And then you read it again, and then again. That was me this week when we learned that the U.S. Secretary of Defense, yes, the person responsible for the world's most powerful military, allegedly issued a battlefield directive so blunt, so reckless, so devoid of humanity that it reads like a villain's line from a bad action movie. Kill them all. Roll the music. Hello and happy holidays. You're listening to Your Neighbor on the Left, a podcast where we talk about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis. I am your host. This week's main story is one of the many things that has happened in Trump 2.0 that reads like satire, but isn't. Pete Hegseth, during a mission briefing for what, as I'll discuss in a moment, was a problematic mission in and of itself, issued an order. That order was, kill everybody. It sounds more like a line you might have heard Arnold Schwarzenegger utter, but I suppose that's exactly what old Pete was going for. I mean, this was the guy who told all of our military leaders when he summoned them from around the world to hear him give a speech, quote, "We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement," end quote. And then, quote, "We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement," end quote. So, in that sense, this shouldn't be a surprise at all, right? So we're going to get into all of it, the mission, the order, and the fallout. But before we do, let's talk about some hot topics. Santa Fe, New Mexico is now making headlines, not because of fireworks, not because of its famous plaza, but because it's become the first U.S. city to tie its minimum wage directly to both consumer prices and housing costs. Starting in 2027, the minimum wage in Santa Fe will go up to $17.50 an hour. And from then on, future wage increases will be governed by a blended formula that weights half on inflation, the consumer price index, and half on local fair market rent data. On top of that, there's a 5% cap on how much the wage can go up in a year. So if costs explode, they're not dialing 12-hour shifts to pay for it. But if prices or rents drop, wages don't go downward. Now, why is Santa Fe doing this? Because rising rents and housing prices have squeezed people who work there, and many of those people cannot afford to live in the city they serve. According to the AP News article, about 9,000 workers, or roughly 20% of Santa Fe's workforce, will benefit from this new idea. For people like Diego Ortiz, a longtime resident and construction worker, choosing between paying rent, buying food, or helping his kids get ahead is a constant worry. The city just didn't randomly pick $17.50. They leaned on data. A finance professor at the University of New Mexico, Riley White, modeled 25 years of changes in rental prices and consumer costs, and he concluded that workers earning the current minimum wage were falling farther and farther behind. The mayor described writing the ordinance as threading a needle, raising wages enough to meaningfully help workers, but not so much that small local businesses would get crushed. Santa Fe is also tackling housing from another angle. They're pushing to build more units and funding affordable housing through a mansion tax, a surcharge on million-dollar-plus home sales to try and expand supply. They recognize, correctly, that wage increases alone aren't enough if there's no housing to go around. Santa Fe's move is notable, but it's not just a local fix. It's a glaring reminder of a larger structural problem in the United States. Minimum wage has not kept up with the cost of living, especially housing. The federal minimum wage has been $7.25 an hour since 2009. Because it hasn't been raised in so long, its real value, that is, what that money can actually buy, has eroded year after year. According to the Economic Policy Institute, the minimum wage's real value peaked way back in the late 1960s. One analysis puts the 1968 equivalent of today's minimum wage rate at well above what workers make now, after adjusting for inflation. Another source shows that the federal minimum wage has lost nearly 1/3 of its value since that 1968 high. In short, the minimum wage has not just stagnated, it's fallen behind. While wages barely budged, costs didn't sit still. According to data compiled by Self Financial, average rent has jumped dramatically. Between 1984 and 2024, average monthly rent grew by 374%, while the minimum wage only rose 116% in nominal terms. That means people earning the minimum wage are spending a much larger share of their income on basic necessities like housing, utilities, and food. For example, utilities now take up a significantly higher portion of a minimum wage earner's pay than they did decades ago. Inflation hasn't been gentle either. Even modest inflation takes a toll when your wage floor doesn't budge. Reports from housing advocacy groups and economists have shown that minimum wage workers often can't afford a modest 2-bedroom rental anywhere in the United States without earning much more than the federal minimum wage. Investopedia notes that in many places, renting even a 1-bedroom apartment is totally out of reach for somebody who's making just $7.25 an hour. Their income falls short of what's considered affordable. Put more bluntly, if you're scraping by on the federal minimum wage, you're probably not going to be comfortably tucking rent, food, bills, and savings into that same budget. Housing alone is likely eating up a huge chunk of your paycheck. Now, Santa Fe's plan feels radical because, surprise, most places don't tie wages directly to living costs at all, especially rent. Instead, minimum wage increases tend to be political battles or rare legislative events, not automatic adjustments actually based on information. Here's why what Santa Fe is doing could be a model for the future. First of all, fair indexing. By using a blended formula, 50% inflation, 50% rent costs, the city is acknowledging that wages need to reflect both the price of everything else and real estate. It's not enough to just peg to consumer goods. Where you live matters. Second, a cap for stability. With a 5% annual cap, the city is saying, yes, costs go up, but we're not here to go nuclear every year. That cap helps small businesses plan and hopefully reduces the risk of huge shocks to workers or employers. 3, no downward adjustments. Wages won't drop if the cost indices go down. That gives workers protection and political stability in case of a weird real estate downturn or temporary deflation. 4, complementing with housing policy. Wage increases alone don't fix housing affordability. Santa Fe knows that. So they're also pushing on supply by permitting more housing and funding affordable units via The mansion tax. That's a two-pronged approach, not just a Band-Aid. The federal minimum wage has been frozen for years, and because of that, many low-wage workers are trapped. Their paycheck doesn't stretch like it used to, especially when housing is a part of the equation. Santa Fe's move underscores how dangerous it is when wages are decoupled from real-life cost pressures. A paycheck that looks okay on paper doesn't mean much when rent is going through the roof. It highlights a growing realization: wage policy does not work in a vacuum. To make work sustainable, especially in expensive places, cities may need wage tools that are smarter than increase by 50 cents every few years if Congress feels like it. And maybe, just maybe, this could spark a trend. If more cities start tying wages to real costs, we might finally see a shift away from minimum wage as static, outdated numbers, towards something that actually meets the living realities of people. In 2025, this isn't just about economy theory or politics. This is about real people. People working 2 or 3 jobs, still struggling to pay rent. Families who live in the city but don't feel like they belong anymore because housing is ripping them out. Cities like Santa Fe trying to preserve their character and diversity, suddenly realizing that without economic radicalism, cultural erasure is the easier path. And for broader society, the question becomes, do we accept a future where some workers can survive, but only if they're lucky enough to be in a place that ties pay to costs? Or do we demand a system where earning a basic wage means more than just scraping by? Last week, the day before Thanksgiving, 2 National Guard members were standing post outside the White House complex on 17th Street. Routine security detail, nothing out of the ordinary. When a guy walks up, pulls an AR-15 style rifle out of a duffel bag and opens fire. Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, 26 years old, from Minnesota, is killed instantly. Her partner, Sergeant Miguel Ortiz, takes 3 rounds but somehow survives and is still in the ICU at George Washington University Hospital. The shooter, Nazir Ahmad Tahiti, 28-year-old Afghan national, came into the country in September of 2021 on a special immigrant visa after working as a CIA translator in Kabul. That means he was fully vetted, fingerprints, biometrics, multiple security interviews, the whole 9 yards, by the Trump administration's State Department, DHS, and FBI. He even got fast-tracked for asylum and a green card path under a program Trump himself expanded in 2020 because, and I quote, his own press secretary at the time, "These people helped us, we're not leaving them behind." So the same administration that spent 4 years screaming about vetting and extreme vetting is the one that personally stamped this guy's paperwork and said, "Welcome to America." So, what does President Trump do the second the news breaks? He goes straight to Truth Social and posts, I'm paraphrasing only slightly here, "Another disaster from the Biden open border policies. We never would have let this animal like this in." Within an hour, the entire MAGA universe is running with Biden's illegal Afghan headlines, and the guy's paperwork has Trump's signature all over it, figuratively and literally. By the next morning, the White House press secretary is on TV saying, "Look, the president feels terrible, but this is what happens when you inherit a broken system from the previous administration." The previous administration. That would be Trump's first term, right? They're blaming themselves in the past tense now. It's almost like performance art. Meanwhile, the right-wing outrage machine is in full meltdown. Fox Prime Time is wall-to-wall, "How dare this refugee be here? How dare we let these people in?" You've got Laura Ingraham doing that whisper yell thing. This is what happens when you put diversity over safety. Tucker's successor is running chyrons that say Biden's Afghan assassin in 72-point font. And then, because irony is totally dead, you flip over to social media and half the same accounts that have spent the last 10 years telling us that every time a white kid with a manifesto shoots up a school, we just have to accept it. The price of freedom. Guns don't kill people. If you outlaw AR-15s, only outlaws will have AR-15s. Thoughts and prayers, rinse, repeat. But now the shooter is brown and Muslim, and suddenly the price of freedom is off the table. Now it's, how could we let this happen? Now it's, shut down the entire asylum program. Review every green card from 19 countries. The same people who said the wake of the Parkland massacre was too soon to talk about gun laws are demanding we deport legal residents the day after Thanksgiving because one guy they themselves vetted, snapped. And the hypocrisy isn't even subtle. It's neon. It's screaming. When it's their sacred cow getting gored, the Second Amendment, dead kids are just the cost of liberty. When it's something they don't like, refugees who helped us fight the Taliban, one dead soldier and they're ready to burn the whole immigration system to the ground. Trump himself went on with Hannity 3 nights later and said, we're going to pause every single asylum case from these terror countries until we figure out what went wrong. Hannity nods like a bobblehead of himself. Absolutely, Mr. President. Never once does either of them mention that what went wrong was their own vetting process in 2021. Look, I'm not here to litigate every refugee or every gun law in one segment, but the selective outrage is breathtaking. If Sarah Beckstrom had been killed by a 19-year-old American with a legally purchased rifle at a Christmas parade, half the country would be telling us to move on. And that's the price we pay. Instead, she's killed by a guy carrying the exact same rifle, but because he once lived in Kandahar, it's a national emergency that demands we rewrite the entire immigration code overnight. Don't mistake this for principle. It's not principle. It's tribalism in a suit. And the worst part, the administration is already memory holing their own role. DHS quietly scrubbed the 2021 press release bragging about how many Afghan allies they brought in. The State Department took down the Welcome Afghan Allies webpage sometime between Wednesday night and Thursday morning. They're counting on everyone to have the attention span of the average goldfish. But we see it. We see the vetting forms with Trump-era approval stamps. We see the same voices who shrug. We see the same people who shrugged at Uvalde suddenly clutching pearls over this tragedy because it fits the narrative they need this week. Sarah Beckstrom deserved better than to become a political football. Her family deserves better than to watch the president who let her killer into the country point fingers at somebody else while he wipes his own fingerprints off the paperwork. And let's not forget the idea that the National Guard was never needed in D.C. in the first place. That's the story they don't want you to hold in your head for more than one news cycle. The guy who did it was one of ours, and now that's inconvenient. They're rewriting history faster than the blood was dry on the sidewalk. I say we hold them to it. Now, conveniently, this third hot topic ties in with the second one because there's just no limit to the nonsense that comes pouring out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue these days. You ever have one of those moments where you hear something so stupid, so petty, so wildly beneath the dignity of the office of the President of the United States that you have to pause and ask yourself, am I still watching the news or did someone switch the channel to a reality show? Because that's where we are. that's where we live now. We live in a country where the President of the United States, the guy with the nuclear codes, the guy with that football, the guy who controls an entire executive branch, is in the Oval Office calling a reporter a stupid person. And this time I'm not paraphrasing. That, of course, is a direct quote. And it wasn't part of a heated, policy-heavy argument. It wasn't during a 5-hour budget negotiation. It wasn't after being asked, explain your stance on Section 702 reforms and the FISA oversight. No. He was asked a completely straightforward, professional, fact-based question. And he responded the way a 13-year-old boy responds when he loses a round of Fortnite. Now let's rewind just for a minute here. The scene is the Oval Office, which historically has hosted conversations like, how do we end a war? How do we stabilize the economy? Should we commit troops? And so on. But that day it's hosting a grown man calling a journalist stupid. CBS reporter Nancy Cordes, who, I'm going to guess, has read more books this year than Trump has ever read, asks a question about the vetting of Afghan evacuees, which, by the way, is the kind of question presidents used to welcome because it gives them a chance to show off how in charge they are. But instead of doing that, President Trump looks at her and says, "Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person?" Boom. Right out of the gate. No warm-up, no stretching, no vocal exercises. Straight to the personal insult. He treated the question like it was attacking him with a machete. Now let me pause here and offer a small note to those in public office. Asking a president to clarify a factual claim is not an act of war. It's literally the job. Nancy Cordes didn't ask if he regretted his spray tan. She didn't ask if he'd explain the last 8 contradictory statements he made about immigration policy. She didn't say, "Sir, do you understand basic arithmetic?" Although at this point, that might be relevant. She asked about vetting procedures in the wake of the shooting of the 2 National Guard persons by the Afghan immigrant. The president responded like she just insulted all of those Home Depot gold wall hangings he has. And as I've stated before, very recently, this pattern is not new, it's not original, and it's not at all creative anymore. Because remember, just a few weeks ago, and this is a direct quote, he told Bloomberg reporter Catherine Lucy, "Be quiet, piggy." Let me just say this slowly so we can fully appreciate it. The President of the United States used a word normally heard in schoolyard fights between 11-year-olds over the kickball. And not to be the kids these days narrator, but even 11-year-olds are more original than that. Then there was New York Times reporter Katie Rogers. He called her ugly, unprofessional, third rate, which is ironic because those insults themselves are so third rate, it's practically D-list material. Do you have any idea how bad your insults have to be for the insult itself to need better writers? This isn't politics. This is a tantrum with a Secret Service detail following it. We're in the Oval Office, semicircle of reporters, cameras flashing, and, a country waiting to hear answers. And Nancy Cordes says, matter of fact, professionally, "Mr. President, you've claimed the Afghan evacuee vetting process was flawed. Can you cite specific failures identified by your administration?" To that, Trump leans back, smirks, and says, "Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person?" There's a beat, not a dramatic beat, not a cinematic beat, just the collective sound of 330 million Americans thinking, seriously? Seriously? This is the president? And So you have to ask yourself why he does this. And the spoiler is, it's not because he's bold. See, this isn't just Trump being brash or telling it like it is or whatever polite euphemism pundits use when they want to avoid calling something what it is. This is a tactic, a deliberate, repeatedly deployed tactic. Because if you can turn the questioner into the story, you never have to answer the question. It's like political prestidigitation. Don't look at the vetting failures. Look over here at the reporter I'm insulting. It's the same trick magicians use, except magicians are better at it and they don't have access to military aircraft. And the gendered nature of it, also not an accident. His track record with women in the press isn't just bad, it's practically a case study. He goes after them harder, he goes after them faster. And when he does, he goes straight for things like looks, intelligence, and tone. The stuff men use when they want women to be quiet. This isn't a coincidence. It's muscle memory. But let's talk about what it actually reveals. It's not dominance. It's not strength. It's certainly not alpha male leadership or whatever nonsense label people slap on behavior that's actually just insecurity in a necktie. It's thin skin wrapped in false bravado. It's fragility disguised as power. It's a lack of confidence masquerading as aggression. Because confident leaders don't freak out when reporters ask tough questions. Confident leaders welcome them. And this wasn't even that tough of a question. Confident leaders know facts are on their side. They know their arguments hold up. They know they can handle scrutiny without psychologically crumbling like a stale cookie. But when your ego is held together with scotch tape and grievance, any question feels like a personal attack. You ask about policy, and he hears an insult. You ask for evidence, and he hears betrayal. You ask for clarification, he hears treason. It's the logic of a man who cannot separate his personal identity from his public office. And let me tell you something. That's not strong. It's brittle as hell. The strongest people in leadership and in life are the ones who can hear the truth without combusting. And the cost of this is bigger than hurt feelings. Because yes, the insults are gross. And yes, they're misogynistic. And yes, they're freaking embarrassing. But that's not the real danger. The real danger is what it does to the press. Every tough question gets you shouted down, mocked, humiliated, or labeled stupid. Fewer reporters will ask tough questions. If every attempt to hold power accountable results in being openly attacked, fewer people will try. It creates a chilling effect, a self-censoring press, a more timid press. And that is exactly how democracies weaken. Not with dramatic cinematic coups, not with soldiers on the steps of the Capitol, although we have that, but with reporters who start asking easier questions because they don't want to be the next headline. You don't have to silence the press to control it. You just have to make them hesitate. And that is what we're watching happen in real time. So let me wrap this up by saying this. Nancy Cordes wasn't disrespectful. Catherine Lucy was not out of line. Katie Rogers didn't deserve ugly or third rate based on her article. They all were doing their jobs. They asked questions you're supposed to ask a president. And in return, they got childish insults intended to undermine them, intimidate them, and distract from the truth, from the real story. So no, Nancy Cordes is not a stupid person. She's a reporter doing her job. But if you're in the Oval Office and your first instinct when challenged is to lash out, not with facts, not with clarity, but with playground insults, maybe the question isn't about her intelligence. Maybe the question is about yours. And maybe it's time we start talking about the idea that perhaps the person who shouldn't be in that room isn't the reporter. Okay, so now on to one of the most disturbing, consequential, and frankly jaw-dropping stories to come out of the Trump administration's second term. The story now known simply as the Kill Them All order. This isn't political disagreement. This isn't a policy fight. This is about whether the United States government ordered its special operations forces to intentionally kill unarmed survivors floating in the ocean. It's about whether the Secretary of Defense encouraged what international law would call, accurately, a war crime. And it's also about how we got here. How someone with a long record of inflammatory rhetoric, minimal strategic experience, and a track record of treating war like a Fox News segment ended up running the Pentagon. So, I'm going to break it all down. What happened on September 2nd, why this is legally and morally catastrophic, how the administration is spinning it, the mounting bipartisan backlash, and the broader pattern of dangerous, unserious leadership from Pete Hegseth. This shouldn't be a story about left and right. It's a story about right and wrong. So let's start at the beginning. On September 2nd, 2025, the United States conducted its first maritime strike in what the administration later branded as a war against Venezuelan-linked drug traffickers. But here's the thing. That war wasn't declared. Congress did not authorize it. Nobody debated it. And the targets weren't firing on the U.S., they weren't attacking Americans, and they weren't threatening American forces in any discernible way. This was a unilateral kinetic strike, a missile launched from U.S. assets at a suspected drug trafficking boat off the coast of Trinidad. The Washington Post investigation revealed the bombshell moment. During mission briefings, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly issued a verbal kill everybody order. Not engage hostile combatants, not neutralize the threat, just kill everybody. That first strike killed most of the 11 men on board. Horrifying, but not unprecedented in the fog of an offensive operation. But the next part? That's where the story turns from tragic to damning. Surveillance spotted at least 2 survivors in the water, injured, unarmed, clearly incapable of fighting. Under international law, these people are what's referred to as hors de combat, which means out of action. That means you cannot target them. But a special operations commander, citing Hegseth's order, authorized a second strike on the survivors, and SEAL Team 6 carried it out. The Pentagon briefings to Congress since then have been described, and this is a direct quote, as evasive. They have released no key footage, no confirmation that the men were armed, no evidence that they posed any threat in any way. And the administration's response has been to claim this is all legal because they're now calling these Venezuelan cartels designated terrorist organizations, which, just so we're clear, is a label the administration applied retroactively to justify the killings. Retroactive legal classifications to justify lethal strikes. Nothing says we did nothing wrong quite like rewriting the rules after the fact. Now, here's where the scale becomes even more alarming. That September 2nd strike, it wasn't a one-off. It was the opening shot of what's turned into a full-on shadow war in the Caribbean. Since then, there have been 21 or 22 similar strikes, the number changes depending on who's talking, resulting in more than 80 deaths. And again, these boats are not attacking Americans. these weren't firefights. They were targeted lethal actions against vessels suspected of drug trafficking based on intelligence that U.S. allies like the UK eventually decided was so shaky that they stopped sharing the intel altogether. Yes, the United Kingdom, America's closest military partner, has basically said, we're out. What you're doing is illegal. If your oldest ally raises a flag and backs away like you've just tried to sell them a cursed mirror at a yard sale, that's generally a sign something has gone seriously wrong. The administration's fallback line has been that this is all part of a necessary crackdown on narco-terrorists poisoning America, because if you attach the word terrorist to anything, you apparently get a free pass to blow it up. But terrorism designations have rules and processes and reviews and legal standards, and none of that happened here. Now, let's talk about the law. Not in a dry, dusty textbook way, but in the here's why this is not complicated way. There are two big issues. First is the no quarter problem. Ordering forces to kill them all is literally one of the clearest violations of international humanitarian law. No quarter means you do not take prisoners, and you intentionally kill anyone you encounter. This is not a gray area. This is a classic war crime. Now, the hors de combat rule. Individuals who are wounded, shipwrecked, or otherwise incapable of fighting cannot be targeted. At all, period. Former military lawyers, including people who have actually prosecuted war crimes, have been blunt. If the order was issued and followed as reported, this is unlawful killing. Like textbook unlawful killing. Human rights organizations have gone farther, calling these strikes extrajudicial executions. Congress, even Republicans, actual Republicans, not just the performative ones, are sounding the alarm. Roger Wicker, the Republican chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, is promising vigorous oversight. Mike Rogers, the Republican chair of the House Armed Services Committee, is demanding a full accounting. Mike Turner, the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, said the whole thing would be seriously illegal if it happened the way it's being reported. Rand Paul and Chris Murphy, ideologically opposites, are united in saying these strikes are unconstitutional and reminiscent of authoritarian regimes. And when Rand Paul and Chris Murphy agree on something, you know you've crossed a line so obvious it can be seen from space. So, how are the key players responding? Well, Hegseth is doing what Hegseth always does. He's calling it all fake news and fabricated and dishonest reporting from the Washington Post. He says the strikes are legitimate, lethal kinetic actions against drug traffickers poisoning America. But, and this is important, he also says he never ordered the killing of survivors. Except we have commanders on record saying that he did. We have operational decisions referencing his order. And we have a pile of evidence that the legal guidance was, at best, incoherent. Trump, for his part, has done his favorite thing. He supports Hegseth completely. But he also says he'll investigate the second strike. He claims he wouldn't have ordered it, and then he goes on TV and praises the mission anyway. It's like someone saying, I absolutely condemn punching strangers in the face, but this particular punch, tremendous punch, maybe the best punch. Inside the Pentagon, attempts to brief Congress have been a mess, short on details, filled with evasive phrasing, and notably missing the key video evidence lawmakers requested months ago. That alone should tell you something. When the Pentagon has footage that helps their case, you see it on TV the same day. When the footage doesn't help, it's still under review. So as of the time of this recording, December 1st, 2025, investigations are intensifying. The most jarring development, Hegseth has launched a probe into Senator Mark Kelly, a former Navy captain and astronaut, because Kelly posted a video urging service members not to follow illegal orders. So, the Secretary of Defense is investigating a senator for reminding the troops to obey the law. Totally normal behavior in totally normal democracies. Meanwhile, the story has exploded on social media, one of the rare times when the outrage online is actually proportionate to the gravity of what happened. This doesn't seem like it's going away, nor should it. Now, let's just zoom out just a second here for fun, because the kill-em-all order didn't come out of nowhere. This is part of a pattern, a long pattern. Here are just some of the concerns people, especially former military, intelligence, and national security professionals, have raised since Hegseth was appointed. First of all, lack of strategic military experience. Hegseth served in the Army National Guard, but he has never managed large-scale military operations, intelligence alliances, or global strategic planning. Running the Pentagon is not an entry-level leadership position. His record of dismissing war crimes concerns. Even before becoming Secretary of Defense, Hegseth publicly criticized the military's prosecution of war crimes and defended service members convicted of wrongful killings, suggesting he saw rules of engagement as optional. His cavalier attitude towards international law. On Fox News, Hegseth repeatedly mocked legal restrictions on military force, calling them political correctness and handcuffs. Well, when your worldview is that the laws of war are just woke suggestions, it's not a surprise when you allegedly give an order like kill everyone. His public statements downplaying troop safety. He once casually said he doesn't wash his hands because germs aren't real. That's the man in charge of military medical readiness during global disease outbreaks. Enough on that. Number 5, ideological extremism dominating operational decisions. Sources inside the Pentagon have described Hegseth as someone who views the military as a tool for ideological crusades, not a professional institution that requires measured judgment and prioritizing media presence over professionalism. This is a man who came to national prominence reading pro-Trump monologues from a couch on Fox and Friends. His brand is performance. And unfortunately, at the Pentagon, performance propaganda kills people. From the moment his name was floated for Secretary of Defense, national security professionals were sounding alarms. He's never overseen complex operations. The Pentagon is a $700+ billion global entity. Its leader needs deep knowledge of chain of command, legal frameworks, intelligence assessments, and geopolitics. None of this was Hegseth's background. He treats war as entertainment. On Fox News, war was a segment, a backdrop, a vibe. But wars aren't vibes. They're legally constrained, morally heavy actions. He's openly contemptuous of legal restrictions. The laws of armed conflict aren't optional. They're what separate us from authoritarian regimes. He has shown repeated poor judgment. From public comments to internal leaks, Hegseth has demonstrated a tendency to shoot from the hip and then justify it later. He is excessively deferential to Trump's impulses. A Secretary of Defense must sometimes tell a president no. Hegseth has never shown the inclination or ability to do that. Chosen for loyalty, not competence, is the story here. And in the Pentagon, that is how you get tragedies. Here's the truth. Killing wounded survivors in the ocean isn't a policy dispute. It's a line we are not supposed to cross, a line we have prosecuted other countries for crossing. If we excuse it by redefining the targets after the fact, by hiding the evidence, by claiming the law doesn't apply, it sets a precedent. The United States can kill anyone anywhere without due process based solely on executive say-so. And not just in a war, because remember, we are not in a congressionally authorized conflict with Venezuela. Congress didn't approve this. The American people didn't debate this. This was unilateral, secretive, and hidden until investigative reporters blew the door open. If democracy means anything, it's supposed to mean oversight, accountability, restraint, transparency. And when the Secretary of Defense issues an order that appears to violate the rules of war and then calls it fake news when he's caught, something is fundamentally broken. So now, where do we go from here? Over the coming weeks, here's what you want to watch. First of all, congressional hearings. Expect subpoenas, expect fireworks. Hegseth will be grilled. Interagency fractures. If the UK pulled its intelligence cooperation, other allies may follow. Military whistleblowers. They're already speaking to reporters. More will probably come. Internal Pentagon tension. Many uniformed leaders already distrust Hegseth. That's only going to deepen. There will be political fallout. Republicans are split. Democrats are furious. This story cuts across party lines because war crimes cut across party lines. And hopefully there will be public pressure. Videos, if they exist, will eventually reach daylight. The truth always leaks, especially when the stakes are this high. So here's what it all boils down to. This is not the story of a mistake. This is the story of a policy, of a worldview that sees force as the first tool, not the last, that sees international law as a nuisance rather than a necessity, that sees human beings as disposable if they're on the wrong boat in the wrong ocean. And it's the story of a Secretary of Defense who was never qualified for the job, who was hired for loyalty, not judgment, who treats warfare like cable news, and who, according to serious reporting, gave an order so sweeping, so reckless, so profoundly immoral, that it has shaken even members of his own party. America cannot remain a nation of laws if the people at the top treat the laws as optional. And America cannot lead the world if it behaves like the regimes it claims to oppose. The truth matters, accountability matters, and human life matters. And if the allegations are true, and every day more evidence suggests that they are, then what happened on September 2nd will go down as one of the darkest stains on American military conduct in a generation. We owe the truth to the victims. We owe accountability to the Constitution. And we owe vigilance to ourselves, because democracy doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes one unchallenged abuse of power at a time. And now for this week's high note. You know that moment in a bad movie when the underdog quietly does something heroic? Not for glory, not for a headline, but because it's just the right thing to do. That's exactly the kind of story Jonathan White gave us. Dr. Jonathan White is not your typical politician. He's a pediatrician, a doctor, who in 2018 stepped into a mess nobody wanted to touch. At the height of Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy, when thousands of children were being separated from their parents at the border, he quietly helped reunite more than 100 of those kids. This wasn't a PR stunt. It wasn't, look how good I am, politics. At the time, White was a commander in the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps, working in Health and Human Services. He was deeply worried. He had warned senior officials that separating children from their parents could cause serious psychological damage. He wasn't just talking theory. He saw the kids. He heard what they said. He understood that ripping a little kid from their parents' arms isn't just cruel, it can deeply, lastingly scar them. Then, when the administration folded under public pressure and the judge ordered reunifications, White was put in charge of an ad hoc command center, working round the clock, coordinating agencies, running background checks, figuring out how to match kids with parents. He and his team built a system from scratch. In one particularly heart-wrenching moment, he described how this chaos was avoidable. There had been no system, no good record-keeping, no plan for how to reunite children. In congressional hearings, White didn't mince words. He told lawmakers that the real issue wasn't just that records weren't tracked. The bigger issue was that the government thought it was okay to separate families in the first place. He pushed for a change in the law, saying separation should only be allowed in very narrow cases, when the child's safety is truly in danger or when a parent has committed a serious crime. Fast forward to this month, or the end of last month, and Dr. White is doing something remarkable. He's running for Congress. Not for money, not for power, but to finish what he started. He's running in Maryland's 4th Congressional District, and his campaign platform reads like a promise to protect what he risked so much to defend in the first place. White is campaigning on a few key pillars. Restoring asylum rights so families seeking refuge aren't punished or torn apart. Funding community health clinics, especially those hit by recent policy rollbacks, because healthcare matters, especially for immigrant communities. Preventing renewed family separation, drawing on the stories of the families he helped, pledging that if elected, he will fight to shield children from being separated again. And here's the part that really gets you. This is not a glamorous, high-powered campaign. According to his announcement, he faces significant challenges: limited political experience, modest fundraising, and running against an incumbent. But those don't stop him, because for him, this isn't about being typical. It's about doing what's right. You've got to admire that kind of courage. That kind of courage that says, I saw injustice, I fixed what I could, and now I'm going to try and fix the system. Just think about that for a moment. A doctor, someone whose job is literally to heal, deciding that medicine isn't enough, that politics is part of healing too, that the wounds left by family separation deserve more than Band-Aids. They need policy, protection, real structural repair. And he's not campaigning on abstract slogans. He's talking to the very people he once helped, the families he reunited, the kids who needed to be put back together. He's turning their stories into a platform of hope. Now, you might ask, is this just symbolic? A feel-good narrative for a midterm campaign? Maybe. But the stakes are real. Policies are on the line. Clinics are closing. Asylum access is under threat. And worse, the mechanisms that enabled those separations in 2018, the loopholes, the chaos, they're on their way back. Dr. White's campaign is a reminder that an individual, even someone who wasn't born into politics, can make a difference. That heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's behind closed doors, trudging through bureaucracy, convincing agencies to do the right thing, reuniting children and parents when nobody else will. So why does this story matter, beyond being a feel-good piece of uplifting news? Because it offers a blueprint, a reminder that real change often starts quietly. It doesn't need celebrity status. It just needs someone familiar with suffering, someone who's waded into the mess, someone who refuses to look away. And in a time when a lot of people feel powerless, when big national headlines are full of division and conflict and fear, his campaign is a shot of optimism. If you believe in a future where families belong together, if you believe in healthcare for everyone, if you believe in the kind of democracy where decent people don't just stand up, they run. Jonathan White is running. And he's not doing it for show. He's doing it because he has already saved lives, and now he wants to save policy. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of leadership we need more of. All right, that brings us to the end of another episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to all my rambling today, to listen to all the things I have had to say. I would love to hear from you. I would love if you would reach out, whether it's with compliment or critique or questions or whatever. You can do that by using any of the social media platforms for the podcast. The links to all of those are on the Linktree page, and the address for the podcast Linktree page is in the podcast description. You can also reach out via email. The email address is neighborotleftpodcast@gmail.com. So please do reach out. Let me hear from you. I'll be back on Friday with another installment of Back Porch Files. So until then, stay engaged, stay kind, and as always, have the kind of week you'd wish for others.